USS Corey is one of those interesting ships that had a career that flies under the radar. By no means is she unique in this. Many ships have interesting careers that get overshadowed and see little coverage. In the 1940s, this is especially true, with so many tales of heroism or tragedy from all over the world and from every major navy on the planet. Which is where we come back to Corey. She was doing what many ships did that hectic day, driving as close to shore as possible, often more than was safe, to support the men ashore. And she paid for it, breaking into and sinking in shallow water. Water that was so shallow that, even broken in her midsection, Corey largely remained above water. This would allow for... well, we'll get into that. For now, as is customary, I'll cover her history before that chaotic June day. USS Corey was laid down on September 4th, 1940. Entering the water on July 28th, 1941, she would end up commissioning into the Navy on December 18th, 1941, in the aftermath of the United States entering World War II. However, Corey would not join the actions in the Pacific. No, she was assigned to the Atlantic Fleet instead, or she would be anyway, after completing her shakedown cruise in May of 1942. Upon completion of that, she was immediately tossed into escort duty, as Corey helped escort Queen Elizabeth, the ocean liner, not the battleship, to New York. That was on May 23rd. Following that, she continued on her escort duties. Really, this is what she would be doing for most of her career. In this specific case, though, she would escort other warships around for the most part, though she also participated in convoys from time to time. The only notable breaks in the action, at least until October, would be escorting USS Indiana during her sea trials, and picking up a handful of survivors from a torpedoed freighter. This is all fairly routine for an Atlantic Fleet destroyer in the lack of grand sea battles like those raging across the Pacific. It would only be in late October 1942 that Corey really got a break from the monotony, by virtue of being part of USS Ranger's escort during Operation Torch. Though it should be noted that Corey, in particular, didn't see much actual action. She was present for the first major American action in North Africa, but she didn't directly participate beyond escorting Ranger and picking up the crew of a downed Dauntless. Nothing exciting, though at least she wasn't stuck in the North Atlantic watching for U-boats. Even so, with the conclusion of the main landing operations, Corey detached from Ranger and escorted USS Texas back across the Atlantic on November 16th. Once she was back in American waters, come late November, Corey returned to Boston and a routine maintenance period, at the conclusion of which it was back to... well, I think you can guess where this is going. Escort duty would take up Corey's time for the rest of the year and into 1943, and she would continue to do the same for all of that year as well, because that's the life of a destroyer in the Atlantic Ocean. For the most part, some obvious exceptions aside. As such, I won't cover this part of her career in great detail. It is a lot of escorting ships around, and saw little in the way of real action. This isn't a bad thing, certainly, because it meant she was doing her job and her crew didn't suffer any losses. For an escort ship, she was doing excellent service. It's just not the kind of thing that is exciting to go over in this kind of format. The most exciting thing she did, for basically the entirety of 1943, was escorting USS Ranger once again. This was in early October, and was during Ranger's stint bombing German shipping up and down the Norwegian coast. More exciting for Ranger, but at least Corey got somewhat close to the action again. When this was done, and following a detour to escort HMS Anson to a meeting with a Soviet convoy, Corey was back to Boston. Escort duty would once more follow, as 1943 gave way to 1944. This year initially looked to be the same as the previous two, with Corey escorting other ships around. The destroyer even got her chance to be escorted on another new capital ship's shakedown cruise, this time USS Hornet CV-12, repeating what she had previously done with Indiana. Everything would change in March of 1944. First were failed attempts to hunt U-boats at the start of the month. Then there was the much more successful hunt of U-801 on March 17th. That submarine had previously been damaged by air attack from USS Block Island, the escort carrier that Corey was operating with. The air attack on March 16th had done some damage, along with killing one of U-801's crew. That said, it didn't sink the submarine. What it did do was leave an oil slick that could be followed back to the U-boat, the bane of any submarine, and the death of many. By the early morning of the 17th, Corey had picked up targets on radar. These turned out to be decoy balloons sent up by the Germans, and were promptly shot down. With blood, or oil as the case may be, in the water, Corey steamed towards where the oil slick had been reported. She wouldn't find the U-boat at first, standing down from general quarters by 5 a.m. Several hours of nothing would follow, until around 10 a.m., a new oil slick was spotted by an aircraft off Block Island. Corey promptly steamed in that direction, and searched with her sonar as her crew returned to general quarters. Corey slowed down to first 10, then 6 knots, as she set about her search pattern. By 11 a.m., she was dropping depth charges on sonar contacts. About 25 minutes later, a periscope was spotted and promptly barraged with more depth charges. While the submarine vanished again at that point, her fate was sealed. Even if Corey hadn't found her, a destroyer escort, USS Bronstein, was also lobbing depth charges in the area. Within an hour, U-801 had surfaced. At about 12:13, now into the afternoon of March 17th, Corey spotted the submarine. Her captain wasn't about to let the U-boat slink away, so he promptly put his destroyer up to 27 knots and charged right for her. He probably didn't need to worry, though, as reports indicate that U-801's seams were opened, her bilge pumps knocked out, and she was just generally in rough shape. Even if the submarine submerged again, she probably would not have come back up. Even so, Corey didn't hesitate, firing every single weapon aboard. Her 5-inch guns and smaller automatic weapons raked the U-boat, killing her captain and putting enough holes into the already battered submarine to sink her. U-801 sank around 12:30 in the afternoon on March 17, 1944. After Corey set up for a ram if her gunfire hadn't done the job. 9 of the submarine's crew would die in the sinking, including her captain, while 47 were pulled from the water and brought aboard Corey. For a sunken U-boat, that's actually a fairly high survival rate, all told. Not long after this, on March 19th, another German submarine, U-1059, was sunk by Block Island's aircraft, one of which promptly crashed into the water. One of the crew of that aircraft managed to get free of the sinking plane, and Corey was promptly sent in to pick him up. Which is where I'll break from Corey's story for a moment, because this is also a story that needs told. That one survivor, Mark Fitzgerald, was a good man. After inflating his own life raft, he would drop another one for a man who swam up to him. Sure, he initially thought the man was part of the Avengers crew as well, but even when the response to "Can you speak English?" was a resounding 9, it didn't change anything. Fitzgerald showed the German how to inflate the raft and climb aboard before tending to his wounds. Soon enough, 2 more survivors from the U-boat showed up, including the ill-fated submarine's captain. Fitzgerald treated their wounds as well, prompting the German captain, Gunther Leopold, to call him a good fellow with a damn war for good measure. Stories of human kindness like that need to be told, because even after the Americans bombed the U-boat, and the submarine contributed to shooting down the Avenger, they still came together in a common cause for survival. That said, by the time Corey arrived on the scene, only 8 of the U-boat's crew were able to be rescued. They were picked up, along with Fitzgerald, at which point Corey returned to duty with the escort carrier. Before she returned to Boston, arriving there on March 31st, she transferred off Leopold and his surviving crew to be put in prisoner of war camps before going into refit. She would remain there until April 8th, before post-refit training for a few days. In any other circumstance, she probably would have returned to her usual duties. However, Corey was instead sent to Britain to join in Operation Overlord. On June 6, 1944, she was not just one of the first ships heading for France. Corey was, in fact, the lead destroyer of the invasion task force. That is quite an honor for a ship that had, to this point, not done much of note outside the U-boats I just covered. Still, her actual duty began with more escort work. She covered transports and heavier warships as they crossed the English Channel, before then covering Utah Beach as the actual invasion began. Coming within 4,000 yards of the beach, Corrie dueled with German shore batteries for up to 20 straight minutes. Now, I should note at this point, Corrie was supposed to have an aircraft drop smoke to cover her. I've seen conflicting reports on if there was a malfunction that prevented the smoke from deploying properly, or if the plane was just outright shot down. Regardless of the truth there, Corrie didn't get her cover and was exposed to shore fire. That is why she was dueling with German shore batteries, as they could quite clearly see the destroyer. Her captain didn't care much about that, bringing his destroyer as close as 1,000 yards to the beach. Her guns fired several hundred shells towards the shore. This was all well and good, and a classic example of the risks that the shore bombardment forces took on D-Day. Corrie would, unlike most, pay for that risk. Things are a bit murky here. The initial report of her sinking indicated that she was hit by shore fire, specifically from an 8-inch gun battery. This fire cut through the destroyer, breaking her keel and jamming her rudder. This report was scrapped, apparently without input from the actual crew, and changed to say that shelling damage was, and I quote, incidental damage, and that Corrie had actually struck a mine. This is the official explanation for her sinking, that at 6:33 that morning, USS Corrie struck a mine and broke her back. Now, if it was a mine or shell fire, is disputed to some extent to this day. It might even have been both. Whatever it was, the fact is that Corrie had her back broken, and she quickly sank in shallow water off Utah Beach, under continuing bombardment from shore. This in spite of her crew managing to hand steer her back to sea, while her boats were trying to set up a tow for the crippled destroyer. It was not meant to be, and not long after the initial damage, her crew abandoned ship into the freezing cold water, where they would struggle to stay afloat and warm, while under constant fire from shore. And yet, one of her crew took the time to, as she settled to the bottom, remove the American flag from her stern and raise it on her mainmast. Corrie, as I said at the start, sank in such shallow water, 30 feet or about 9 meters, that she remained largely above the water. That flag is, as a result, sometimes considered the first American flag raised on French soil during the landings. Is that a technicality? Yeah, probably. Is it also a fine story and something that the crew of USS Corrie can be proud of, in addition to their heroic gunfire support? Also, very much a yes. That crew deserves some good news anyway, as they froze and struggled in the water for nearly 2 hours. Eventually, other destroyers, USS Fitch, Hobson, and Butler, showed up to rescue the survivors, along with PT-199. The men were pulled from the water and eventually sent back to Britain. 24 of them would not live to see that, and another 60 were wounded to varying degrees. Thus ends the story of USS Corrie, a ship that did good service and may, if you choose to believe it this way, have metaphorically planted the first American flag on France during the D-Day landings. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.